Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tattva, the principles of investing. Here we talk about investor behavior and not investment behavior, which we used to talk about in our previous series. One of the interesting facets of our profession is that we always recommend our investors to save and never let them spend. But when we see the reality of the world, we also realize that spending is an equally part of one's evolution. To discuss this topic, which is often ignored, we have with us Mr. Swarup Mohanty today. Mr. Swarup Mohanty doesn't need any introduction. He's the CEO of Mirae Asset Investment Managers India Private Limited. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much, Harsh, and thank you so much for having me on this very interesting topic of discussion.
Pleasure is ours, sir. So my first question is about inability of a lot of people to spend. We see this problem very often in people of our generation and people senior to us. And we also find that there is a high amount of correlation between how people spend and their background, their past experiences, and how they were brought up. We see Parkinson's law of triviality playing out in their mind very often, where they debate and think a lot before spending 500 rupees on a cup of coffee, but they end up spending on a high ticket item without batting an eyelid and without doing proper analysis. How do you reconcile to this?
I think you said it right, because when you look at the basic life per se, and spending is about life, spending is about how we have grown up, how we have seen our surrounding, and there I think you said something very interesting is uh, our previous generation and this generation are very different, and the reason we approach spending with a lot of frugality is got to do with the environment we were brought up. I mean, when you look at my previous generation and my generation, and you look at the difference between my generation and my son, the difference in economics is just glaring. We taught each other frugality and spending is because we didn't have money, right? If we had money, we would have approached it very differently. So we approached it with a lot of caution. We approached it by thinking that, money can spoil us. A lot of it is taught to us middle class people, because the bottom line and the truth is we didn't have money. So when you look at growing up with that background, of course, the frugality comes with it. But as you progress in life, you start handling money. And most of us, we start handling money when we start earning money. So the background of not managing money then starts playing out. If we were taught how to manage money when we were young or as children, then we would have probably already crossed stage one when we started earning money. So when we start earning money, it takes us some time to get accustomed to it. And then what I feel is the huge part of spending is knowing the difference between your needs and wants. And what you said is correct, because we often confuse the two. Hence, we don't know whether we should spend 2 rupees on something which is a need, or, don't think twice before spending on an extravagant thing. And in that process, wherever we were confused, I think the COVID period has a very telling sort of, what can I say, impact in our lives, because in COVID, we spent almost 2 years in our houses, just catering to our needs. It, I think, is that one defining period in our life which differentiated between what our needs are and what our wants are. And I feel post-COVID, all of us have come out of it financially more aware. Before that, what you say is absolutely correct. We spend because it's 200, we didn't think twice. And sometimes we debate that to whether we should be spending this or not. But when it's something towards your want side, and that's when your greed takes over, you start pushing towards that kind of expenditure. So it's a very, very interesting psychological mix of your need, want, greed. These three combine to then lead to a spending sort of behavior. And the more you get into it, the more interesting it becomes.
I'll take this question a little further. So, whenever internally we talk about our competition, we often say that our competition is not a fellow advisor, but real estate, cars, and all those things. And I would want to address that part now. Now, whenever we see investor behavior with respect to purchasing high ticket items like cars and the house, which I mentioned earlier, the problem is people just see the entry price and the exit price. And at times they get so emotionally attached that they end up spending much more what they can. Now, when they do that, they end up leveraging themselves. And in that leverage, they have EMIs, recurring expenses, and everything. Now, all this leads to a situation where they're hardly left with any surplus to build their financial assets. Now, at some point in their life, they realize that maybe having financial asset is also a part of the portfolio and very much required, but then at times they're very, very late. So, how do you address this?
Again, where we spend and what we need is a reflection of the journey of wealth, as I call it. If you go back traditionally, and typically a middle class or a lower middle class tries to learn this from the upper middle class or the wealthy or the rich people. If you go back to the earlier days, the rich of the world used to own houses or jewelry, and that is where this bend towards owning a house or gold actually came, which we call fixed assets. But as we take this journey of increasing our financial literacy, that we start knowing that more of spending has to be done with our lives or what is surrounding our lives. And that's when our basic spending pattern changes. Earlier, when I was young, there was nobody like a Harsh Kumar there to advise me on what is right or what is wrong from my life from a financial plan perspective. And that is where we see a lot changing in the last 1 or 2 decades, because when you put it mathematically, rentals are 2 to 3%. People who buy a house and give it out on rent, like you rightly said, never calculate finally what is that percentage or CAGR or how much is the return of that rent. But that is slowly growing. And then when you look at life from our perspective, again, another one part is most of us grew within environment. I grew with an environment where my parents had pension. So they were not preparing for the retirement. The retirement was more or less taken care of. But as you start taking this path towards financial literacy, you start then segregating your expenditure. And that's when you realize that your first part of your life, when you don't earn much or when you're single, that's the time to be a little selfish and realize that your biggest spending is towards the biggest ticking bomb in India. That is your retirement. You'll probably work 30, 40 years of life to have income to survive for the next 30, 40 years without income. And that's when, the spending or the investing pattern completely changes. And then slowly but surely, we are seeing the young moving towards that. It's in small baby steps, but because the baggage of buying a house or gold is so large, they'll probably take one more generation. But I can say, by virtue of meeting people around me, this process has started. It is also got to do with the growth of financial advisors like you, which are now beginning to guide people from a fixed asset regime to a financial asset regime. Then, when your income is less, you start, I would say, you would start thinking of your retirement first, taking care of your medical insurance, all that first. Then, when you kind of go towards a house, is when you probably get married and involve your spouse on thinking of what kind of a house you want. Even then, if your retirement goals are not on track, that should be met first. And once you start generating surpluses over that, should you start thinking of an EMI? Because if you are going to get a house at 2 to 3% rental income, why not use that house than putting in that kind of EMI, which you just talked about? But all this needs to be taught, and I'm very happy that people like you are doing that. The need for planning your life according to your investments is a basic need. Giving a tangible outcome to your investments, which is pertaining to your own life needs, is the most important thing in life. And that's something which is beginning to look as something which will happen post-COVID. Again, I refer back to that COVID because I think all of us have done a lot of soul searching in those 2 periods. And I see this bent of moving towards financial assets to be bigger now than what we used to be in the past. Hopefully in the next 5-10 years, once my son's generation comes out and starts working, he's already started working. He already has a house and he does not need to buy a house, because inheritance will start becoming a reality in India in a very serious manner. 2 things, because the joint family has disintegrated. Earlier it to be one father with 4-5 kids with one house. Now it is one parent with probably 2 houses giving it to 2 kids. So once that phase is over, we will see a far quicker stride towards financial assets than fixed assets were in the past.
So that's very interesting. And hold on to your thought because I'll come to that in the later part of our conversation. So now coming to a very, very important discussion point these days, which we come across is wealth versus mental health. And I'm reminded of a very famous quote which says that wealth is a vaccine, but not a performance enhancing drug, which means that it can take care of your miseries, but it doesn't guarantee you happiness. Now, whenever we see people around us, we see a lot of them saving disproportionately high and not taking care of their needs and wants, and thereby even not building a social circle around them. Thereby, by the time they want to spend or they have accumulated more than enough, they are often lonely, and that leads to mental health issues. Now, the interesting dimension here is that we are seeing mental health issues related to money not only among rich people, but even middle class also. How do we come out of this particular dilemma?
Yes, I'm so happy you're asking me this question because the mental health in anybody's life is, very highly underestimated. And the importance that money plays in defining one's mental health is even more underestimated. The fact that if your financial wealth is on track, that your mind can be stable, is something one subconsciously does not associate with. Hence, it is in the selfish interest of every person that they take this path of putting their money needs in place. And that's where financial planning and a guide to financial planning is so important. Because once at the back of the mind, one realizes that my financial journey is okay and I can do other things, that the mind then comes to a different level of stability. The kind of pressures that one builds up by not knowing your financial status, as you rightly said, some people might have a lot of money, but they are not able to correlate that to their own life journey, whether they have enough or they don't have enough. Financial planning is a mathematical journey. If put in place, can lead to incredible financial mental stability, and that's something more often than not understood. Typically, people feel that taking a financial path is creating wealth. It also is creating mental wealth. Is something which is something which all of us need to realize. And the quicker we realize that, the sooner we'll embark on the path of making our financial investments logical. More important, logical towards your own life, because that's what you need to do. Lead your own life as per your needs and wants. Once you start this journey, the kind of mental happiness that one gets, or just the mental peace one gets, that my money is okay, is something which is always underestimated even today. So I'm happy you asked it, and I hope people realize that there is a correlation between your mental health and your money health always.
I'll tell you from our experience being investment advisors, we often come across multiple behavioral aspects of investors. But there are two common traits which we see, or two popular ones. One set of investors who have a lot of money and they can spend because their ability is very, very high, but they don't want to spend, which we have discussed in last two, three questions. And the next is people who don't have money, but they leverage and they spend. And now my next few questions are about the second category, and especially about young generation. We often see them buying fancy things which is not even required by them, but they end up spending 1 to 2 years of their salary on those things which are not as important as they perceive it to be. Now, at times we have seen P2P lending, BNPL coming to their help, but in the end, they get up into a debt trap at a very early age in their career. So, how do you address this particular problem?
Yeah, I think, all of us have had our share of that in some way or the other. When you start growing in life, your first objective is to fulfill your aspirations. And that's where the catch is. If you go a little overboard in the aspirations, in our days, money was not as easily available as it is now, like you rightly put it. So it's always a catch-22 situation. But people will aspire to fulfill their aspirations, and nothing wrong with it. I would definitely encourage people to do that. And that's why one works, right? To think and own things which you had dreamt of, logical or illogical. I'm not commenting at this moment, but that's the basic essence of life. I come from Bhubaneswar. The reason I ventured out of Bhubaneswar is to build a different life, not better or not. I'm not commenting. Very different life, see the world, increase my worldview, and experience things which I would not have, say, in Bhubaneswar, due to lack of my industry in that city. But it's always prudent to sort of understand that. But like I said, all of us go through that path and learn it the hard way. I would rather some people take the hard path, learn it the hard way, and straighten up. I have gone through enough. If I start talking about it, trust me, it's going to take a full day for me to straighten up. But what is also, there are two sides to it. While there is easy money available, there is also a lot of information available. There is also a lot of people like you now bringing that sanity amongst people. Yes, whether we will be able to reach all of them or not is the question. I'm sure we will not. But whoever we can reach, we should be able to impart this knowledge of mental sanity over what you can spend and what you cannot spend. And going overboard is greed, and that always is a question. It's a big debate. But from your perspective, I would like to say that leverage has not yet started in India. What we are talking about is still some time. Yes, it started, but when you compare ourselves to the rest of the world, we're still okay, because debit card sales still are outnumbering credit card sales. That's one data which I follow very, very diligently, because that's where the cookie starts crumbling. And if we start taking the other path, then rebounding from that or restructuring that financial status will be a hard path back. I think in every generation there are some people who are casualties to that, and I do believe that some part will remain there, and then the others will learn from that. I just hope that people we are concerned with are able to be guided in the right way and not fall to that greed factor which can eat up your life.
Understood, sir. And just to add to your point of debit card versus credit card, even if you see UPI spending, which is primarily from bank account and not from credit card till now,
True.
that also indicates that still in India, people are spending from their pocket and not by leveraging themselves.
I think,
So
Harsh,
now,
one has to be cognizant, whenever we talk, I'm sorry, I'm just taking that question a little forward, in the sense that, we always, when we talk about inflation eating away our money. The bigger killer is what you are saying, the lifestyle inflation. I'm not saying that it is wrong, but as long as we are aware that this is our lifestyle inflation, and then I, kind of agree whether it is right or wrong, then one can plan and still stay within the limits. What happens is it creeps in very fast, and that's when we lose control.
that's very interesting, lifestyle inflation. And coincidentally, my next question is about that. Now, when we see money, at times it can be a liability also, because you will always have someone who has more than you. You will always aspire to take things which at times can be more than your sources of wealth. Now, we have also seen a lot of times purchases happens not because of their utility, but because of their status symbol. Now, we have often in our discussions referred to Warren Buffett, where he has a famous quote that if you end up buying things which you don't need, you will have to sell up things which you need. Now, how does one balance between aspirations and savings?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think that's where one will continue that lifestyle inflation sort of discussion, because finally everybody's life is different, right? And everybody's approach to life is different, and I feel everybody's right. Question is, are you then taking your life as your finances? That's the big question. It's easier said than done, because you are in a world of peers, in a world of comparison. There are enough social pressures on you to lead you away from this journey. I would say, again, going back to my earlier discussion, that the initial phase of life, one will definitely fall prey for some of it. I'm not saying all of it, but the sooner one controls it, the better. It's in the selfish interest of life that one controls it as soon as possible. I've gone through my share of deviation from my financial path many a times, and I think after I turned 40, is when I was able to stabilize that requirement. There was always that greed factor. There was always that lurking attraction to go and do something out of the ordinary, which was beyond my means. But after I turned 40, I think I leveled myself out, and then things changed. So it's also an age factor. It's also a factor of how you perceive life. Again, I mean, just to be on the other side of the story, I dare say some will fall prey to it. And I just hope people learn quickly and adjust to it, to their own finances, far earlier than they should. But my simple answer would be, the earlier you take control of the knowledge of the lifestyle inflation, the better it is for you. The earlier you know that you are doing it because somebody else is doing it, and then you do it, there is no problem. But you have to know, you have to take control of that knowledge that you're doing it for this and nothing else. And after that, if you decide, okay, I need to do it because of certain reasons, then you provide for it. My worry is 9 out of 10 people don't know why they're doing it, and that's where they get carried away.
You mentioned word knowledge, and I would want to dwell a little more on that. Now, sir, we do understand that this generation lives a very socially pretentious life. Now, we are in a world, sadly, where algorithms drive our behavior more than the deeper knowledge of the subject which we want to imbibe. Now, this also leads to a situation, like I mentioned earlier, that you have peer-to-peer lending, you have BNPL. Along with that, whenever there is a need to get higher returns on money because your sources are not sufficient enough, a lot of young people get carried away by financial influencers. We have seen a lot of talk about this from the regulator as well. But the problem is that it's very painful to read books. It's very painful to get clarity on the concepts, but it's very easy to get carried away the promise of higher return from a financial influencer who may have some vested interest in that particular propagation. Now, how do we guide this young audience to avoid that and be focused about what they should be doing?
Yeah, I think whenever there is something in excess, the law does come in, and we've seen that there is a need for a law there, and thankfully the regulators are working on the financial influencers part. Sooner or later, I hope that that part will be regulated, and whatever we speak, we have to speak with a fair amount of what can I say is the right word, fair amount of fiduciary capacity that we call in our side, is that fair amount of responsibility is the word that I was looking for. Now, when you look at the world today, yes, you are completely in a world of information, free-flowing information, unwanted free-flowing information is the real way. And every minute there is one sort of attraction to divert you away to some sort of spending which can be far away from your life. And more important, because of this digital world, buying that and providing for that money is also at the click of a button. So this seamlessness is only adding to that whole complication or this whole mess, that, or mess is not the right word, maze is the right word of that is being created around us. It's I mean, I really don't have an answer for it, because clearly the social media is something which is ruling all our lives, and the only thing I tell a lot of digital advertiser is, you go on flashing the product after I have bought it. I do not know why you do that. The moment you buy something, it starts flashing everywhere. But I hope people, one thing I must tell you is that, I'm a big fan of the young. They might look all over the place, but I do believe that they have a fair head on their shoulders. And sooner or later, they will see through it. They are smart enough because they have far more information at their fingertip than we had. They might look gullible, but trust me, they are not. They're slowly moving around from what I call in our generation creating assets to their generation creating experiences. Some will fall prey. I'm not saying this from the broad thing, but I do believe that sooner or later sanity will prevail, and we are beginning to see it in a greater extent. I mean, it's not that credit or PNP lending is getting big numbers. I'm sure some part do use it, and that's got to do with our generation. It's not just the young who are borrowing. Trust me, our generation is borrowing more than the share that is needed. But one has to be aware. One can only point out this. At the end of the day, it's uh, how you are inside and how you are strong to stay away from this will define you. Again, it comes with some amount of bad experiences. I'm sorry. That casualty will only lead to becoming a better person. I'm just sharing this from my own example. I've had my share of gullibility in life, and that's made me a little more prudent, is what I can say.
Absolutely. I think you are a firm believer of evolution, and we also believe in that. And you rightly said that is young who gets blamed, but at the end of the day, people in the middle age or even senior citizens at times would be equally gullible for things which they would want to get into. It's only the matter is that the financial institutions are more than happier to lend to younger people than older ones, and then I think they end up getting disproportionate attention as well as disproportionate share.
But Harsh,
So
their job is to lend. They will
right.
lend. They will do their job. It's up to us.
Absolutely, sir. So my next question is something where we have often heard you talk, and that's about teaching the value of and thankfully we had done a podcast with you also on that around a couple of years back. Now I would want to connect to the point which you had mentioned about assured inheritance for the next generation, and you rightly mentioned that family sizes are shrinking, affluence is increasing, and some kind of an inheritance is assured for the next generation. Now we also do understand that you can teach the value of something to an individual by telling that source, but when you tell them that everything is available to you on a platter, how do you teach them the value of money or the virtue of money?
Harsh, I think whatever we've discussed now, no, on whether you'll be wayward, whether you'll be prudent, all begins at home. And I think it's a big responsibility of parents to nurture their children, not only to be good human beings, but to be financially good people. And that charity starts at home. Let me tell you, I think I learned this from my parents. I'm just being a little honest, so don't take me otherwise. I'm a son to two professors back at home, and it's not that we grew with a lot of money. Two government jobs. Thankfully, there were two, so we were a little better off than people who would have one job. They would call my parents, "You are double engine, so why do you worry?" Right? But what my parents did, knowingly or unknowingly, I do not know, they maintained complete transparency of the money that came in. I knew as a son how much money was there in the house, and there wasn't enough. There wasn't enough for me to have pocket money. So I never had any qualms that there were other kids or most of my friends had pocket money I didn't have, because I knew there was no money to have pocket money. And that made me a little responsible towards what I should spend, what I should not spend. I think I give a lot of credit to that transparency. So that's something which I've maintained with my son. Obviously, between you and me, very honestly, is that my economic status is little different from my parents. I don't have to worry because hopefully there should be some inheritance from them to me from a fixed asset perspective, and then there will be some from me to my son. But this is known to my son. How much money I have, how much money my wife has, is known to my son. And I firmly believe that if they have the knowledge of this, they will be prudent enough to find their path. It is often that the problem happens is when you hide things. And later then they realize, oh, there was money, my dad didn't tell me, is when things start going wrong. So I have learned this from my parents, that once you are financially transparent with your child, the child then grows up to be a better financial person. If you look at the business communities in our society, the kids who have grown up in a business community are financially more aware than us, because they're taught money from the childhood. This is dhanda, to usme se itna aata hai, nahi aata hai. All that is taught. And once they're taught, they obviously take it up in a very different way than more often than ours. In families like us is where the problem is. But my learning and what I tell people and all my colleagues, my families I know, is be extremely transparent with your kids on money. And don't underestimate their capability of upgrading themselves in that path. And that's where most of the issues lie. If you are brought up well on money, you will know what your needs are, what your wants are. You will know which is a good spending, which is not a good spending. You will know, okay, this is a need, spend to my need. But what can I do? I need to buy this big car. So I will spend in buying that big car. The person will know. Once the person knows, then the person decides, okay, this I'm spending out of my need, this I want, so I want to spend, the greed factor. The problem, as I've been saying this in this entire discussion, is not knowing. But I feel if you maintain that transparency at home, and it begins at a very, very young level, I think a lot can be done. And in changing the way the kid or the child's outlook on money.
Absolutely, sir. It's a very important life lesson, and not just at a personal level. We find Mirae Asset and you being very transparent at a professional level also, and that's something very, very rare in this field. So with this, we come to the end of our discussion. But since we have the opportunity of having you with us, I would want to have a few rapid fire questions. So the first question, uh, you are responsible in a big way for Mire's success in India. So despite having all kind of things happening with the competition around you, how do you maintain sanity and ethos at Mire?
Yeah, I think not me. See, you say you are as good as the team, so all of us are responsible for what we are. As there is only one rule to this business: what is right for the investor is right for us. If you keep that in your mind in every decision you make, sanity will automatically prevail.
And now I'll take the leaf from the first question and the first answer. What keeps you so grounded and so humble and so approachable?
So I think a lot has to do with my upbringing. I'm born to two teachers. I'm married to a PhD holder, and whatever little I can, sort of think of being a little carried away, my son levels me at every point of time. His basic statement from childhood is, "Dad, you don't know anything," and trust me, he knows more than me. Okay, at 24, his brain is superior to mine. So it's that environment which brings you up. And secondly, this big knowledge that our business is based on somebody else's hard-earned money. And if we goof up, then somebody goes out with a loss. Is something which we remind ourselves every day before we come to office. And that, I think, is something which I'm very fortunate that to be sitting on a chair, that people give their hard-earned, trusted money to us. People like you trust us. And then you tell me, how can we let you down knowingly? Mistakes can happen. And if mistakes happen, then we should be transparent enough to tell you that it's a mistake. And more often than not, if you're transparent in admitting your mistake, you are forgiven. You're allowed one mistake, not more than that. Don't repeat mistakes. So that's what it is.
And now I would want to ask you a question which is related to this podcast, and that's about spending. What is something that you can't resist spending on?
Too many things. Yeah. You know that I spend a bit on my music. That's where all my money goes into. I have a good music system with a perpetual need to upgrade it. That's where most of my spending goes. Otherwise, travel is the other part. But I consider travel to be an investment because it broadens your mind. You meet different cultures, different people. You come back knowing a lot more. So I don't consider travel as spending, actually. Yes, music and buying hardware around my music is where most of my spending is.
Great, sir. So music and travel, I think these are the two things which actually we also feel it broadens one's mind. So lastly, what is one piece of advice that you would want our listeners to be?
See, I think, at this moment, there is a risk to investing, there is a risk to not investing. There is a risk to investing in Indian markets. There is a risk to not investing in Indian markets. At this moment, when your country is poised to go from 3 to 6 trillion, the risk to not investing in Indian markets is fairly large. That's something which not only people should know, people should internalize. And that's something which I'd like everybody to sort of dwell on.
So now with this, we come to the end of our conversation, and a few key takeaways from this conversation, which would really help us and our investors, is that we need to understand that times are changing. Inheritance is now becoming reality, but we should also have a financial plan, because when we put it on numbers, at least it helps us not get misguided. You told us about data points on debit card versus credit card, and assured us that India, though we claim at times anecdotally that we are getting highly leveraged, but still we are far away from that. You talked about lifestyle inflation, which is a good concept for all of us to ponder over. And then you mentioned very interestingly that don't underestimate the power of young generation. They are far more smarter than us. We might think that they are getting carried away, but everyone has a right over a fair share of mistakes, which we would also have committed. Lastly, one sentence with which I would want to end this is that what is right for investors is right for us. And that is something which, as advisors, we would want to carry with us. Thank you so much for taking out time. We really appreciate your time and effort as always. Thank you, sir.
So thank you so much for having me. Always such a pleasure.